So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to another custom scenario, and this one's a little bit weird because it might be a rather rare beast in that it's perhaps a little bit more of a pitch battle than a siege battle. I'm not entirely sure how to categorise this one, to be honest, because a large portion of the battle is likely going to take place out on the open field over there, where a large section of all four of the players' armies on each team are going to be clashing with one another. But there's also this area around these hills and the little settlements as well that is nestled at the bottom of it, where there are a couple of reinforcing armies as well, of which I'm sure we will see them make a little bit of an impact as well. This scenario was made by Morris. We're going to be seeing it, however, from the perspective of Y2K86. Little look around the map though, because it does look as though a decent amount of effort has gone into this one. There's plenty of structures, there's even the open field area is got a lot of interest in it with lots of bits of terrain and such, and there's also of course the ships out to sea that have just arrived, which I assume are meant to signify the arrival of the Easterling army over here, commanded by Mevin. Got almost like an oriental look to them in a way. But yeah, it's going to be quite an interesting one. It's shorter than your average custom scenario involving 8 people as well, which again is going to signify the fact that it is going to be a little bit more open than most other maps of this kind that you are likely to see. Even so, 26,000 frames for what is going to largely be a field battle could end up being a pretty exciting one indeed. And there are some decent defensive positions that both sides can take up. It's also worth saying as well that as it is more of an even footing, both sides should have fairly even chances going into this battle. Obviously, certain factions are going to be slightly stronger than others at certain things, but you should see both good and evil have a relatively fair shake at this one, so we shall have to wait and see. Y2K himself is going to be playing as the Dwarves of Khazad, the infantry wrecking ball that they are. Hammers of Gundabad on the front, really useful unit this, because they're very damaging, especially against armoured units. That being said, it looks as though, based on the Mumakil over there, he's facing off against Harad, so the armour piercing not quite as useful on this occasion, and indeed the Dwarves' heavier reliance on their own armour might prove to be a bit of an Achilles heel against the Southrons, as we have seen in the past. But the Hammers of Gundabad's locked morale is what really sets them apart from other shock infantry of this kind, because you have to kill all of them to the last man, which is easier said than done when it comes to a higher end unit of Dwarven infantry. So even though they might not be as efficient as they otherwise would be against their chosen foe this time around, they should still be able to be very useful indeed. Now, something else which is incredibly powerful, every bit as devastating as something like the Witchers, the Iron Watch of Miramir. Now, if they get into a good position on this map, they will be able to rain terror down upon their foes, but they are starting off on lower ground, especially considering we saw some units perched up on cliffs in the middle of the map, on the road that bisects it. So it'll be interesting to see if the Iron Watch of Miramir can actually post up in a position where they can be super effective, because if they can, they're such a game changer. Honestly, I think they might be stronger than the Witchers just because they're easier to use. They are tougher, they're more difficult to kill off if you're the enemy. If you see the Witchers, generally speaking, you can prepare for them a little bit more easily. But the Iron Watch is a little bit more difficult because of that Dwarven resilience and just the fact that there's more in their unit. So a very, very dangerous unit for the red team to be on the lookout for there. Some upgraded 4th Legion Shield Guard. Again, upper end unit of spears. This is the kind of unit that, even though they are now subject to the spear malice, obviously it's been a while since the previous patch to this one at this point, but back then the 4th Legion Shield Guard were somewhat unique in the fact that they were not subject to that spear malice, which effectively gave them all the benefits of spears, with none of the drawbacks, because they were just as good, if not better, at killing infantry because of the faster spear animations. Now they're in line with a little bit more what they should be, but they can still act as line infantry perfectly well, because obviously the Dwarven quality will see them through against most foes, and indeed against the Haradrim here, against the entry level units, particularly against Haradrim Spearmen and the Southron units, they're going to be very, very difficult to take down, and indeed they will rack up a decent kill count regardless. Back in here, we have the more entry level units from Khazad. Warriors of Khazad are here. As far as entry level line infantry units go, the Dwarves are going to be obviously up there in terms of what is the best in the game. I would even say that I prefer this kind of unit to stuff like the Swords of Rivendell over in Imladris and the Lorien stuff from the Elves, purely because line infantry, I find it better when they are a little bit bulkier in terms of their armour, and that is one of the few areas where Imladris and the like have got lower armour values, whereas the Warriors of Khazad, certainly there are more heavily armoured Dwarven units of infantry, but they still pack on a decent amount of armour for their cost. Sentries of Khazad, the entry-level pike unit, this is going to be very useful, the sort of thing which can be very good at keeping the savage hordes of the Haradrim and the other armies on the field, of course, at bay. Unlike most situations, it's going to be a little... I mean, over on this side, it's a little bit more one-on-one between Harad, and the dwarves, but elsewhere on the battle you could see other armies also come in for a piece of the action. A couple of units of miners as well, just to help pad out Y2K's army, and just in behind I would assume that yes indeed we've got some mercenary crossbowmen back here, so obviously the dwarves don't have their own mounts in Khazad's case, so they're going to pay these men to do it for them, and obviously it does give them another pretty potent ranged unit with their crossbows, but they're very fragile to enemy arrow fire. And there are a couple of units back over here as well, including the Legion bodyguard, which I would assume, yes indeed, is his general's bodyguard, with a couple of Sons of the Fallen as well. Relatively small reinforcement army this, especially considering the amount of Easterlings down there, but the quality of the dwarves there is pretty substantial. Now we have Froggy playing as Dol Amroth. Dol Amroth on an open field are actually going to be potentially damaging, depending on how well he can use his cavalry. We've said in the past the position that cavalry is in this current patch. We'll have to wait and see how they tweak things next time around. Athalon men-at-arms with the armour upgrade, they're obviously not going to be on the same level as the dwarves of Khazad when it comes to infantry, but most of the Western Kingdoms of men are at least going to be robust in melee because of the extra armour that they can pack on. Tarnostian spearmen, again fairly basic, but it will give them a good amount of map presence in a more open field like this. If enemy cavalry tries to get in and around them, it's going to be a lot more difficult when you've got a healthy amount of spears. The Haven Guard are in amongst them, just gives them that real infantry power spike that Dol Amroth will need, and is provided to them by their heavy swordsmen in most cases. Belfalas Marines, javelin action. It's going to be a little bit more open over here, so they could be up against any number of foes. Some Doran pikemen and Tirithea marksmen over here, which looks like they're going to go to the aid of the dwarves, which, considering it's not the entirety of the Khazad army, I'm sure that will be most appreciated by his ally. Then over here, nearest to the camp, there are some Black Swan renegades for a bit of extra armor-piercing bite. Perithil riders, which in the open field should be really useful. I mean, for horse archers, they are pretty well armoured, and they are nicely damaging as well. Perithil Horse Guard, a unit of melee cavalry, and Knights of the Silver Swan, a unit of lancers, which is where his general is, but they aren't bodyguard lancers, so he's going to have to be very careful with using them aggressively. Once again, we see Arthedain, this time under the command of Mr. Sneakman. He's got some fully upgraded Evendim spears on the front, a unit you can really just throw away as you will. Especially with the armour upgrades like this, they can be a remarkably annoying unit actually to get rid of. But yeah, on an open field, the same reasons the Tarnostian spears, the spearmen are going to be useful. Evendim archers, if you want to engage in an elongated skirmish, this is the kind of unit you can really easily do that with Arthedain, because again, their cost outlay is not that great. In a scenario it's a little bit different, of course, because you get assigned your armies anyway, but even so, their job is going to be standing in an open field, shooting as much as they can, and just trading efficiently with the enemy. Fully upgraded Arthedain men-at-arms, they're going to be a little bit stronger, I would say, than the Athalon men-at-arms, because they have a second level of armour upgrade. Not quite as efficient as the Gondorians, perhaps, in that regard, who get their armour upgrades cheaper. But all those kind of units are much of a muchness, really. Very, very similar in terms of function. Arthedain pikemen, with the armour upgrades as well, with their breastplate, it will give them a little bit more rigidity, both in melee and at range, but generally speaking, you want their pikes to do the talking in melee, and you don't want to be getting shot at all at range. Wardens of the North, those Dunedain steel bowmen, looking as resplendent as ever. And also the stronger unit of pikes, we can see here, the Anuinas Gate Guards. Very nice indeed. And then a very significant amount of Arthedain cavalry as well. Dunedain Mounted Company, another unit of melee cav. Fornosterine Knights, another unit of heavy lancers. A couple of units of them, in fact. And also some Dunedain Scouts. So very similar in terms of structure to the Dol Amroth cavalry we just saw. Nothing outstanding in terms of a single unit there. But quite a lot of it, so we'll see how well it can be microed. And finally, we have an Elven contingent to this army as well. We have Tundra's Fox playing as Lindon. Lindon, of course, a very obvious weakness in terms of their armour, but again, if you can get them into melee and if you can dictate the engagement as Lindon, they can be really, really good, but doing that can be a little bit tricky. They're one of the trickier factions to play, in my opinion, but then maybe that's just because I'm no good at playing as light armour factions. For Lindon archers, this pretty much epitomises Lindon. They're really good at dealing damage, but their light armour means that they're not necessarily that good at taking damage for their tier, so it is what it is. Harlindon infantry backed up by 4 Lindon pikemen, classic Lindon frontline that. Very good line infantry in melee, very good pikes in melee, but again you need to be careful of those missiles. Got some 4 Lindon marines here, so combining spears with javelins, which on a more open map like this, I think I would actually prefer the 4 Lindon marines to the Mithlond ones, just because it means that cavalry is going to have a tougher time in shutting down your dangerous skirmishers. Got some Mithlond pikemen here. We've also got some Noldorin Guard, really, really dangerous units these. I would say that based on the overview of the armies we've given so far, it's the two flanking armies of dwarves and elves which look to be the most dangerous elements of both forces. A couple of units of Mithlond lancers, which are of course javelins, and then they've obviously got those lancers as well. When they run out of ammunition, they can be used a little bit more aggressively against infantry, whereas when they've got their javelins still, it's more of an anti-cavalry tool. And then the Lindon riders, pretty much the opposite. You know, you use their bows against units on foot that won't be able to catch them up, but they're spear cavalry in melee, which gives them an anti-cavalry attack up close and personal, so pretty much the other way around. Now then, we move on to the force that is over here, Rhun. The red team, in some ways, maybe have a slight advantage because their reinforcements are directly behind them, whereas the dwarven reinforcements have to go through the entirety of the opposing force, and they may not even get there anyway. Mevin playing as Rhun has got some Variag mercenary riders with the armour upgrade as well, so they're going to be a little bit tricky for the Lindon cavalry to trade back and forth with. Again, it's going to be really the ultimate question of quality and damage against quantity and that durability that the Variag mercenary riders have. We'll see who comes out on top there. Also the quest to try and claim this high ground. I'm not sure Rhun will actually appreciate being up against Lindon all that much, for the same reason the dwarves won't appreciate being up against Harad. Their armour piercing is even more wasted over here, you would have to say. But the Scion Rhun will still do a decent job. They're a very tough and tanky unit of spears, and being backed up by the Gamprim. The Gamprim are going to have to be careful though. If they go one-on-one with the Lindon pikes, they're in trouble. Indeed, I think Rhun's best bet is going to have to be to skirmish Lindon down, as it is with most factions, to be honest. Dragon's Wrath Warlords. Now this is a pretty bulky unit of cavalry. This is probably the single most impressive unit of cavalry we've seen on the field so far. They're not knights, but they still have that second hit point, which is all important in this version of the game. They're going to be riding with their little brothers, the Loka Innas Rim. Over here we've got a unit of Scion Rim who are going to be guarding the Dragon's Breath cannon. Not quite the tour de force it once was, but it's still the sort of thing which can certainly make life uncomfortable for the blue team. Over here, a couple of units of Variag mercenaries going to be incredibly important for them to be used effectively in this situation. Like Scion Rim, there's Gamprim with clansmen forming up this front line, which is a little bit thin, but again, it all depends really on how actually this is Eclipse's army, so a second army from Rhun, the evil men, having to face off against this alliance of the Free Peoples. Flagrim over here, Dragon's Wrath Crossbowmen. This is another really devastating unit of skirmishers, much in the same way that the Iron Watch of Miramir are, so it's good to see that there is parity between both teams there. They both have a really show-stopping unit of skirmishers. Morris himself, the scenario creator, is playing as a Candish army. He's got some Variag bowmen up on the high ground over there. Before we move on from Rhun though, there is another unit of Dragon's Wrath Warlords, which is another really strong tool for them to have, and also Eclipse has got some Eastron Horse Guard as well as another unit of Innis Rim, so cavalry is going to be a real fixture here with Variag mercenary riders as well, which I'm glad of. If you're going to have a more open scenario like this, it makes sense for mounted units to play more of a prominent role than they otherwise would. The mighty Nurad Storm Guard are easily Khan's best infantry unit, and they've got all of the very dependable Nurads around them, Nurad footmen and halberdiers. Just in behind them the nomadic units, which are certainly more run-of-the-mill, more akin to what you'd expect functionality-wise from the Orcs, but still, a unit of entry-level axemen like this will certainly not go amiss against all the factions that are not Lindon that they're facing off against today. A couple of units of Nurad retainers, so yet more melee cavalry. There's a lot of more defensive cavalry on display here from both sides as well. And that's the sort of thing that Khand does very well at, so I'm expecting good things from Khan's cavalry here, which Morris will need to provide, because most of his army, it looks like, has, well, a decent portion of it anyway, is made up of cavalry. Upgraded Variag horse archers. Again, horse archers is the sort of thing which Khand traditionally does very well in. Nurad Windblades are incredibly fast, as are the Brotherhood of the Lance, one of course bodyguard to your melee cavalry, the other higher end but fragile lancers. Nomadic Marauders, Nomadic Axemen, and then another force which is posted up here on the road to prevent any sort of flanking. It would be a really interesting move if the attackers were to do that though, and by interesting I mean probably bad unless the attackers, the blue team, the red team let them do that. A few units of Nurads as well, and then finally, actually before we move on, there's some runic units over here that we forgot. Cummel's Chosen from Mevin. Few units of Flagrim, which to be fair, the armour piercing will actually be useful over on this path because it's the dwarves they're going to try and stop the advance of. A couple of units of Eastron warriors and a couple of units of Eastron clansmen. So in terms of quality, they don't have as much as the dwarves, but in terms of quantity, they should be alright there with the armour piercing, provided they don't get involved in a really narrow engagement. They should be okay, but we'll have to wait and see because it is quite a narrow coastal path, my kind of environment. And then finally we have WK playing as Harad, his happy place. We've got Southron Warband and Pikemen and Haradrim Spearmen. We've also got some Mumakil. We saw the Mumakil used to brilliant effect on the Mumakil graveyard. I would be interested to see if that's going to be the case again. I would guess no, purely because that was a real outlier, but if he can make them super effective, then that will really be a problem for the dwarves because they can't afford to take those kinds of casualties. South Rhun archers, it's going to be difficult for the Harad archers to really have a really significant impact on the dwarven infantry, but having said that, the dwarves don't have that much in terms of long range options, so maybe the Haradrim can just slowly but surely try and bleed them down, and then, when the time is right, move in with their heavy hitters like the Trollmen, who are going to be so important if they hope to try and beat Khazad in a straight up fight, because they're one of the few units that can actually do that. They are going to get backed up by quite a lot of AP though. I mean, all of these South ones, they aren't the best in terms of quality, but that armour piercing means they won't be useless against the dwarves in the same way that other lower end spears from evil factions might be. The Black Serpents, another way they can do this of course is through mobility. The Black Serpents are incredibly quick. They can charge into the right foes and get out again fast. Then that could be a happy way for them to conduct themselves in this battle. A couple of units of Serpent Guard and a couple of units of Southron Raiders as well, and also Demons of the Desert, another really strong unit of skirmishers. Maybe not quite as easy to use as the Iron Watch or the Dragon's Wrath Crossbowmen, but it's another thing that is very worth bearing in mind. And there could be other hidden units like Rangers and such for any faction that we perceive on the field today that is not Khazad. We're obviously going to see the entirety of their army. But yeah, I think there's not really much point in making a cut here, because I imagine things are going to get underway fairly quickly. It's going to be an interesting one to see how this plays out. This is probably the most cavalry heavy battle that I've done in quite a while. So without further ado, let's begin. So I'm going to take the assumption here that we're going to be seeing more action on this side of the battlefield to start with, purely because there's a little bit more space over here, and the amount of cavalry on display today would lead me to believe that this would be the case. It is going to be quite interesting though, because I do actually think the evil forces have got the edge in terms of cavalry here. Certainly with stuff like the Nurad Windblades, they have the single scariest unit of melee cavalry on display today. But also they've got stuff like the Dragon's Wrath Warlord, so it is going to be quite difficult, I think, for the forces of good to actually gain a real foothold. I mean, you'd think with factions like Dol Amroth and Arthedain they'd be able to manage it more easily. But based on the units they have available to them, it's actually going to be the evil men that have the edge here. Variag Mercenary Riders going to be following the Loke Scion Rim up here to try and claim the high ground. Very important. If they can claim the high ground and rain their arrows down into Lindon, then Tundra's Fox is going to be in some not insignificant trouble. And then over here on this side you can see the Haradrim horsemen scything down from the hill, but it is going to be a bit tricky for them to make much of an impression with their Southron Raiders. They can definitely go after some fairly decent targets. Stuff like the Sentries of Khazad would be my first port of call, especially seeing as the dwarves don't have the most in terms of ranged units, to be honest, especially with the Mercenary Crossbowmen nearby. In fact, they may even be the most optimal target. But we are going to see the first engagements here, I believe, as the Elves of Linden take up their position on this pathway that leads up onto the hill. It's only 4 Lindon archers that are at the front here though. If the Scion Rim try to blitz them down, they could maybe have caught them if they didn't stop halfway up the hill. It would have been touch and go, and the Harlindon infantry ultimately would have bailed the archers out. But they've maybe missed a little bit of an opportunity there. In fact, Rhun, seeing that this is now the case, they are going to be content to try and set up more of a solid front line here with the Gamp Rim anchoring the Scion Rim in place. Let's wait and see whether that proves to be a wise course of action. Harlindon Riders moving forward, so the Lindon Horse Archers are going to be trying to do some damage. They need to be very careful that they don't get caught in melee by the heavy runic cavalry, the Warlords, although stuff like the Innis Rim, in pure melee terms, the Harlindon Riders should be okay actually against the Innis Rim. I really don't know why the frame rate is doing this. It often happens actually when my PC has only just been booted up, which is the case now. Again, another sign perhaps that I really do need to upgrade my hardware soon, hopefully. Eastron Horse Guard are going to be sent packing by the Harlindon Riders. The Runic Cavalry going to retreat back into position. Not the best of engagement stat for Lindon, but then their cavalry is quite light. And there is also the backup of all of the skirmishers from Cand over here. Meanwhile, what have we got going on over here? We do have a bit of a melee engagement, and in fact at this point we are going to go down to half speed just for the moment. You can see here the 4 Lindon pikemen getting into position. This will make life pretty tough for Rhun, to be honest. If they get bogged down in melee against Lindon's pikes, they are going to be held at arm's length, and slowly but surely, even with their heavier Scion Rim on the front line, they will end up losing this fight, and especially with the 4 Lindon Marines right here. Now, a slight wrinkle in all of this is going to be the Variag Mercenaries, who are getting into a good position to try and shoot down into the ranks of Lindon, getting their recurve bows ready, but they're actually going after the units that are in behind the front line. One of these units of archers, I think, does need to go after the Lindon infantry for me for it to be super effective. Meanwhile, South Rhun raiders firing back into Khazad, who have adopted more of a widespread formation but this is understandable. If only the horse archers are coming forward, then you want the 4th Legion Shield Guard to be on the front line because they can absorb this damage much more easily than several of the other Dwarven units because of their armour upgrade and their shields, but also the cavalry can't simply charge on through because those spears are going to be a real nuisance. Dol Amroth are here, they should probably get some of their heavier archers forward. If they sent some Tirithea marksmen over here, then they absolutely should. Not entirely sure why. I'm also really not entirely sure why the game is still juddering. Maybe my PC needs a good kick to get it back into good working order. But yes, Tirithea marksmen are up here, and are they going to be trading blows with the Variag Bowmen? Maybe not the most efficient use of a fairly high-end unit. Certainly I think Khand will be happier about this trade than Dol Amroth will be, especially given the angle that these bowmen are currently firing at. Still no great rush for either of these two forces to commit their infantry across the open plains, which is understandable. I think the evil side have got a pretty good dug-in defensive position as it stands, so the forces of good are not going to want to move forward, but likewise, evil are not going to want to attack into all of those relatively high-end infantrymen. Meanwhile, still this little force over here, which, considering this battle was dubbed the 300 in what Morris sent to me, this would certainly be why, given that we have the Sons of the Fallen and the Legion Bodyguard dug in a narrow canyon as the Easterlings come for them, filling the role of the Persians in that equation. They are going to be waiting as they will. I mean, again, it's going to be tough, but there is ample armour piercing over here to the point where the Sons of the Fallen and Legion Bodyguard alone might not be enough. Over here, a Thalond men-at-arms. Dol Amroth moving forward, but perhaps foolishly so. The Tarnostian Spearmen and the Thalon men-at-arms getting stuck in with the Mumakil. Forward go the 4th Legion Shield Guard as well, trying to back the South Rhun Raiders up a little bit so that the Mumakil don't have the same level of support. Not a huge amount of casualties inflicted on Dol Amroth though. The Mumakil do what they usually do and bumped into them, knocking them over, not actually killing a great deal of them. Forward come the South Rhons once again. South Rhun Raiders. They really don't want to get too tangled up with the Tarnostian Spearmen, though I'm not sure what this is in aid of really from the Harad. Maybe it's to try and bunch these units up so that a single swing of the Mumakil tusks is enough to cause absolutely devastating losses for Dol Amroth, but so far that isn't really coming to pass, and with the Dwarven spears on the way forward and stuff like the Hammers of Gundabad, that opportunity may be gone already. Meanwhile, over here, a lot of cavalry here as the Khandish and Runic horse archers are being forced backwards by the Dol Amroth heavier knights. Perithil riders on the way forward. That's a lot of horse archers. The Dragon's Wrath warlords and Nurad retainers acting as a bit of a backstop as well. So there's no great danger of Dol Amroth managing to force their way through this avenue of attack. There's Harlanden riders as well though. Dunedain scouts, a lot of cavalry starting to mass over here. But really, as we head back over here to this engagement, we can see that both sides have taken losses, and indeed with the addition of that ranged fire coming in from those Variag mercenaries, Lindon are taking losses, but again, it's going to be, whoever wins this isn't going to win it without any casualties taken, certainly, but I don't know, I mean, Rhune's skirmishers are actually looking in fairly good condition, all things considered, so while their infantry is still losing ground, largely due to the pikes and the fact that the Harlanden infantry are in there as well. Rhun are sending up more reinforcements though, so Lindon will have to reciprocate if they want this fight to continue going. An Alderaan Guard would be just the thing to really make a statement of intent. But will he commit them, or will he just move them closer to the fight? Variag Bowmen are shooting, but they won't have a particularly good angle, so it's nothing too great to worry about. Meanwhile, yeah, the Haradrim are the ones being pressured here. Forward come the Serpent Guard. They don't get up to charge speed though, and even if they did, the Tarnostian Spearmen did arrive on scene. So not a particularly good time there for the Haradrim Lancers. But Harad with their quite a few cavalry units, let's not forget, for the red team on this occasion. So if they can move forward with their infantry in an organised fashion here, the blue team, especially given some of the expertise that they're offered by the dwarves and the elves, if they can keep a good shape, make sure the cavalry can't get in and around them, that is a way that they can really impress themselves upon their foe here. The Serpent Guard do come charging in, and they do actually get a decent connection there, killing off a fair few of the 4th Legion Shield Guard. They need to get out of there quickly. If they don't, those Dwarven spears will start to have a really heavy impact on the Serpent Guard. Mercenary Crossbowmen are moving forward. They've already taken a fair few losses. Getting in range of any sort of ranged unit is going to be a problem for them, as will this. Serpent Guard charging in, and they are going to engage in the melee. And that's going to be bad news for the Merc crossbows. More of them being lost, but again, some Serpent Guard falling. Not necessarily the be-all and end-all. A little bit of a vanguard force moving forward here with the Tarnostian Spearmen going to absorb the charge of the Southron Warband, and then the Hammers of Gundabad are going to get in here as well. This has left this road here completely empty. Perhaps an opportunity for someone to move forward. In fact, Morris has sent forward his Variag Bowman on the attack. That's a very good opportunity for the blue team to get one unit killed free of charge, essentially. Forward come the Mumakil again, crashing through. Yeah, the Hammers of Gundabad, every time they swing, they stand a pretty good chance at killing off one of the Mumakil. Tarnostian Spearmen rout as a result of the Mumakil crashing through their ranks. Hammers of Gundabad will not suffer from that, of course, with their locked morale. They're all bloodied, the Mumakil, except one of them in the middle. Now the Hammers of Gundabad are going to be surrounded by armour-piercing units. Southron Warband, but at the centre of this effort from Harad is going to be the Trollman. So perhaps a little bit more is going to be needed. Mercenary Crossbowmen also on the way. Now then, Dol Amroth's cavalry really struggling to make any sort of impression. In fact, like I said, I wouldn't have really bothered to try and move forward in this manner. Too much cavalry on the position here. You've got to wait until they're a little bit more spaced out. Variag Horse Archers, for example, taking a charge from the Knights of the Silver Swan. They won't enjoy that. Over here, let's have a look. I mean, this is going to be a large engagement on the front line now. Lindon have committed forward more units. The Variag Mercenaries presumably are being very efficient here, but more Lindon units are on the way. Speaking of which, the Lindon cavalry was pushing forward, now moving backwards. They can't afford to take a straight-up engagement with all of the red team's cavalry on this occasion. There goes a general. I would assume that's the runic one, actually, because I would suggest that it was the Scion Rhun, and not the Harlingen infantry, where a general was included. I'd be very surprised if it was in the Harlingen infantry that the Lindon general was. Well, not entirely sure what was hoping to be accomplished here. Variag Bowman trying to get into the Tirithea marksmen. They would have lost that fight anyway, even with the armour upgrade, let alone the Arthedain man-at-arms also getting into position to surround them, and this will only hasten their demise. Arthedain getting a chance to use their infantry. Meanwhile, it is over here where the dwarves are starting to push forward. The Mumakil being used very well once again, though, by WK. They're not dead yet, which is how you know they're being used pretty well. And he is going after the Belfalas Marines, because one shower of javelins and probably one or at least one or two of the Mumakil will fall, possibly more depending on how many javelins connect. But still, the dwarves and Dol Amroth over here are doing the right thing. They're spreading themselves out, not letting the cavalry get around them too easily. Ooh, hello. WK, has he noticed his Hashari shadows? He has. They were revealed, hidden on the top of this hill. Just look at that. Sentries of Khazad, several of them falling. It was almost them that caught the Hashari mounted rangers there. That would have been a really big loss for Harad, but as it is, they have got some cavalry in behind enemy lines, and it's a particularly dangerous unit as well, given that Y2K doesn't really have much of an answer for that. But more Dol Amroth infantry is on the way forward, and they are continuing to constrict on the red team, who continue to pull back, trying to let their cavalry do as much damage as they possibly can. Dragon's Breath getting some kills on the Arthedain and Tirithea units. That is a lot of dead Dol Amroth archers. Back go the Arthedain cavalry. Dol Amroth sending forward some units, but Froggy sending this unit really to its demise. Not a great deal could have been gained by sending those forward, and I would assume that we can see exactly the culprit for that carpet of Dol Amroth bodies right here, the Dragon's Wrath Crossbowmen. Certainly using their bolts to really good effect there, but Rhun are moving forward, so it is actually the red team that have elected to push forward a little bit more, which is interesting. Throwing themselves upon the pike lines, as it were. All of the blue team factions have access to pikes. Only Harad of the red team have got theirs, and even then they're relatively low tier. Lindon slowly but surely are winning this fight. The Noldorin Guard are in here, but they have taken losses. So it has been punishing for Lindon up here. As is usually the way, that light armour really does them no favours whatsoever when they're in this sort of situation. The Nurads now backing up their Easterling brethren. The the Easterlings are also pushing in on this part of the line over here, seeing that maybe it's a little bit thinner on the ground. Arthedain pikemen and Arthedain men-at-arms getting their formation clattered into by Flag Rim. The armor piercing will be useful over here, certainly, especially when they get up close and personal with those Arthedain pikemen. Can this cavalry be used to good effect? I mean, the problem is they can't really get the space that they need with the runic cataphracts in and amongst them as well. Otherwise, they would almost certainly be working up the runic line as we speak, but all of these units are in the way. Brotherhood of the Lance and Nuran Windblades on the way forward as well. Tirathean marksmen will be shooting in, so this isn't going to be kills free of charge for the Easterlings of Rhun. Emendem archers in behind, going to be trying to get some shots off as well. Dragon's Breath cannon shots. Going after the cavalry actually, and they did manage to get a square hit, but the splash damage is not as extreme as it once was. Meanwhile, here are the Hashari Shadows, Haven guarded there, as are Black Swan Renegades. Still using their missiles, but this maybe was a little bit of a mistake, because that wasn't an intentional charge, I'm sure, and there's really not many units you'd want to bump into less than the Haven Guard on the field today. A very, very powerful unit of infantry indeed. Meanwhile, Lindon finally looks as though they're going to be victorious over here. Overwhelming force applied to the one remaining unit of Veriag mercenaries. And indeed they rout under the weight of the High Elven assault. And that's going to put extra emphasis, to be honest, on the red team being successful down here on the field. Because if they're not, then Lindon will be able to get in and around them with some infantry, and that could prove to be a bit of a disaster, but it's going to be easier said than done. Arthedain are going to slowly but surely lose this fight on the front line. Even with those pikes, the sheer weight that the evil men are applying to this is going to yield dividends for them eventually, especially when you see examples like this of the Eastron clansmen pushing their way through and bisecting the lines. Still, Arthedain men-at-arms continue to fight. The Illuminous Gate Guards having a better time of it. You can see over here the Gamprim really struggling against the more elite Arthedain pikes. In come the Brotherhood of the Lance. They're going to get a nice charge. That is going to force the Gate Guards to turn around though. But that is also going to have the desired effect on the Brotherhood of the Lance. But ultimately the winners of that will be the red team. And the red team doing quite well for themselves so far over here. Lindon may have been victorious up on the mound, but I think what we're going to see here is we're going to need to see a little bit more urgency from Khazad and the wing of the Dol Amroth army that was sent over here. They need to start pushing in, because if they don't, their allies are going to get slaughtered out on the open field over there. Arthedain having a bit of a torrid time of it. Lindon also is going to need to hurry. What was that? Was that the Iron Watch, mayhaps? Possibly. Maybe not the optimal time to use it. But it's better than doing nothing, as Arthedain continue to try and stand fast against the Easterling menace. Mithlond pikemen moving forward, so some Lindon reinforcements are on the way, but they need to be a little bit quicker on the draw here, Lindon. Unfortunately, Mithlond lancers are here. They don't think they have their javelins after the cavalry engagements that happened earlier, but they will be able to charge in here. And these rear charges are going to be really, really significant. Yeah, you can see here that they could end up breaking large swaths of this front line, so very different look to the Rohirrim, but a similar effect could be had here. The Numinous Gate Guards really suffering under those cavalry assaults, but now getting back into position, this will be a worry. The Nurad Storm Guard are on the front line. That armour piercing of theirs very, very tough, but I mean, to be fair, for Arthedain, the Gate Guards are probably the unit you'd want up against them, because it will be more difficult for the Storm Guard to actually get their attacks off. Things are very hectic now. There's some Inas Rim in here, trying to charge into the Wardens of the North, but they are ultimately going to get dealt with. Four Nosterine Knights are going to chase them down as well. That's actually some Dragon's Wrath Warlords mixed in there as well. Dunedain Troll Slayers revealing themselves, Flag Rim routing. Yep, so they've managed to salvage this situation, I would say. The blue team, and all of a sudden things looking okay for them. Simply too many units. The doubling back as well of the Haven Guard and the Black Swan Renegades has also helped their cause. Dol Amroth being of great help. But now, what's going to be happening over here? Nomadic Axeman fighting hard on the front line. Southron Raiders, the Athala Men-at-Arms do end up routing. Here are the Halberdiers, as Harad and a wing of the Kandish army pushing in over here. Meanwhile, that certainly has got to be the Iron Watch of Biramir, that thudding and the camera shaking. Dwarven Miners in behind, still the Mumakil being used to really good effect actually. Aha. There they are, the Mumakil running all over them. I mean, that's understandable, it's very risky for the Mumakil, but they need to make something happen here, otherwise their front line is going to get absolutely flattened It may be a bridge too far for them anyway, to be honest, with the quality that the dwarves can apply. Hitting themselves there as the black serpents come careening into them. Still some miners trying to make life a little bit more difficult for the Haradrim riders. Serpent Guard are there. In come the Nurad footmen. So they are going to get a complete surround off on this dwarven front line, which is something. There's still nothing happening over here, actually. Tell a lie. It's looking like there might be. Rhun are now going to start making their way forwards. Elsewhere, Emendem archers, along with all of the rest of the infantry over here, dealing with the Gamprim. I mean, the Nurad Storm Guard is such a strong unit, but against odds like this, they're really going to struggle. And of course, the Haven Guard are no less impressive than their Khandish counterpart. You would give the Haven Guard the edge there, and indeed there goes the Khandish General. Khan don't have the best morale, so you'd imagine that's going to have a pretty catastrophic impact on their ability to continue. Lindon infantry. Nurad retainers sweeping across the field. That is surely one of the runic armies. All this melee cavalry is here. I wonder if a rule that Morris forgot to tell me is if they break through that canyon and head up that road over there that they win. And after a certain amount of time they do it, because if it's just going to come down to outright victory on the field today, then I would certainly be backing the blue team here. The forces of good. In come the Nurad retainers, battering their way through the scattered remnants of Dol Amroth's infantry, but there isn't enough of them, conversely, to make this a push that will last. Foremost to Rhine Knights. I mean, Arthedain's cavalry is looking like it's seen better days, certainly. In come the Nurad retainers. They're not going to have a huge impact on a unit as strong as the Wardens of the North. Lindon infantry are going to get charged, but again it's just by entry-level horse archers, so while they will take a few losses, it won't be absolutely devastating in the way that it could have been. Most intriguing. Meanwhile, over here, they're going to try and push their way through here, the Easterlings, which would lead me to believe that that might be the victory condition, but Sons of the Fallen with Legion Bodyguard, they're going to fight hard on the front line. Stuff like the Eastron clansmen are going to die in droves. The Flagrim will have a little bit more of an impact. Certainly the Carmel's Shadow Guard will, and the Carmel's Chosen will at least be sturdier than anything else the Easterlings have over here, but the Dwarves so far holding on for dear life. And I can only assume that that is going to be... yeah, that must be the victory condition, surely. Because, yeah... well, actually, I don't know. Could just be overall success, because there is this wing of the army as well, which ultimately has defeated this Dwarven army from Y2K. And that will be another foe that the rest of the blue team will have to fight, and there's still some scary stuff in here, stuff like the Trollman. Black Serpents coming in, so the Iron Watch of Miramir were shut down adequately. The Mumakil are still here, and they're not running amok yet, which is pretty incredible. Again, expert use of a unit that's pretty difficult to use, honestly. Now then, Mithlond Lancers coming over here to try and reinforce the dwarves. At the very least, this will prevent Rhun from simply using all of their mass on the front line to make life more difficult for the dwarves, because they're going to need to commit at least some infantry units behind them. The Mithlond Lancers charging in there, doing a lot of damage to these Eastron warriors. Another charge. I mean, they're not full units by any means, but this is still going to chip away at what strength Rhun have left. At least it's not ranged attacks that the Eastron warriors are falling to this time, I'm sure they're thinking. Meanwhile, the Dwarven shield wall holding firm. There's some Carmel's Chosen making their way to the front with the flag rib now, so this is pretty much the sternest test that the Easterlings are going to be able to give the dwarves on this occasion. And we are going to be heading towards the final 10k frames here. The road lies before them. Pretty significant force still here. A few Nurads as well, including the Halberds, giving them a phalanx. Very useful to have as the battle wears on. Meanwhile, the artillery has been caught out Black Swan Renegades moving in, but a combination of Scion Rim and the crew of the Dragon's Breath, which is somewhat unique in the fact that they are very, very strong in melee themselves. There are the Haven Guard as well, just trying to prevent them from shooting, I think, at this point, and then more reinforcements will arrive to try and finish off these runic warriors once and for all. Still trying to man the artillery pieces themselves, which is fairly game of them. Dunedain Troll Slayers being charged by Serpent Guard and Southron Raiders. The longer they stay in melee with these battle axe wielding Dunedain though, the worse it's going to be for cavalry units such as this, but again perhaps they're just trying to slow them up and buy themselves a little bit of time to reform. More and more of them are heading off that way, look. So that, again, the urgency with which they're pursuing this would lead me to believe that they can't allow the dwarves to be broken over in this pathway, but again, the enemy units littering the place. The Mithlon Lancers were able to help temporarily, but now with the Chieftain's Vanguard over here, things have become a little bit more chaotic, and with the Nurad Retainers as well, that's going to put a stop to them completely, or at least that one unit. There is still more Lindon units over here. Mithlon Lancers charging in, desperately trying to fight their way to the dwarves, but this is the problem. The dwarves are now completely surrounded. Carmel's Shadow Guard attacking them from the rear. That's probably the worst unit that this could be for the dwarves, because this is the one that is capable of dishing out the most damage against them by far of all the units that the Easterlings have over here. And you can see that several of those Sons of the Fallen are actually falling underneath the weight of those halberds. They themselves are not the most durable unit of the Carmel's Shadow Guard, and they are dropping like flies, so this is a temporary thing. The dwarves won't lose based on this, but they're in a pretty precarious situation at this point. Still this fight going on this hill as well. They have actually managed to get the cannon back as well. Dragon's Fire may once again rain down upon the field, but Black Swan Renegades struggling. There's not enough of them anymore, and the Loke Scion Rim standing firm. Further down, it's going to be tough this, because I mean they have got some units remaining here, Lindon and Arthedain. Arthedain are going to move over to maybe try and engage Khand and Harad as quickly as they can. Maybe dragging their heels a little bit though, Arthedain, if the idea was to try and move as one. Lindon went way further ahead of them. Hunter's Fox is going to try and bail out the dwarves with what was remained of his infantry, which is admittedly not all that much. And everyone seems to be rushing towards the Canyon Pass. Lindon are going to arrive on scene first, but then shortly after them, Khand and Harad would be able to get there, but then following them, what remains of Arthedain. It's all a bit mad at the moment. Legion Bodyguard trying to get off the front line, which is a little bit peculiar. Their presence on the front line would greatly help out Sons of the Fallen, but for the time being the dwarves actually succeeding in holding the line, which is very impressive. Lindon are getting down here. The Nurad Retainers are having to retreat. The Pikes are the ones leading the way, being the Trailblazers, and on this occasion it makes real sense to have the Pikes be the vanguard, seeing as it's only cavalry to deal with, but there's also a full unit of Noldorin Guard, which is a really substantial unit to see coming to your aid. And Lindon might just be the allies the dwarves need here. There's not that many of them left, and you can see down here Arthedain are going to be able to stop at least a portion of these armies from getting over to stop Lindon from helping the dwarves. The Southron's getting in the way of the Dunedain, but surely Arthedain will be able to beat the battered remnants that Harad deigns to leave behind. And yeah, the Haradrim Spearmen do rout in the face of all of these Dunedain, including the greatest of them, the Wardens of the North. Dunedain scouts firing their bows, Southron archers leaving. Grey Company are there, which we didn't actually see in the actual battle. Cavalry like this does tend to slip the net, but very similar to the Hashari Shadows, I would imagine, in what they did. Still that Dol Amroth and Runic engagement over there, which Rhun are ultimately going to be victorious in. Evendim archers getting into a position where they can shoot, trying to do as much damage as they can to those units which are going to try and go after the dwarves. Lindon may very well be able to bail out the dwarves over here with these reinforcements, but then they may also have to join the dwarves in a bit of a desperate stand against the Haradrim and Khandish units that are coming for them, and then hope that in turn Arthedain can come to their aid as well. So it has all the makings here of a pretty damn close fight. Few Lindon javelins finding their marks. Nolder and Guard are in here. Defeat seems certain though, maybe a little bit too much of a desperate push from them. I mean, they should be able to be victorious here. It's just a sea of basic runic units they're having to face off against, but it's not the best shape of an engagement from them. And ultimately 4 Lindon archers are over here, Lindon infantry, but yeah, they should be fine. They should be able to defeat the Easterlings here. Mithlon pikemen are on the way down here as well. The cavalry was blocked from coming this way. The Mithlon pikemen can now close in as well. As we go through this road, it is going to be canned. They're heading over. Nomadic marauders, Nurad footmen, halberdiers. Nothing too scary though. There come the Nurad retainers, showing themselves once again with the black serpents. Could they be heading over to try and diffuse the potential problem that is Arthedain? Because Arthedain have already dealt with the scraps of infantry that Harad decided to try and throw in their way. The problem with trying to use cavalry on this Arthedain force is you're going to have to pick your targets really carefully. Between the Troll Slayers, the Pikemen and the Warns of the North, they're all super dangerous units to cavalry and melee. Now the Nurad retainers, still Dunedain scouts around, and I think are out of ammunition. And as if that wasn't enough, Rhun were indeed victorious over here, which means they are going to have some reinforcements on the way. The Dragon's Breath cannon. Over here, meanwhile, Rhun have managed to break through at this point. The Dwarven defence, mostly in tatters. They're going to have to try and kill off all of these Sons of the Fallen, though. It's devolved into a chaotic fight, which in theory should favour the Easterlings and Variags, but the Elves really pushing in here now. The Nolder and Guard have managed to weather the storm, and these entry-level runic units are going to be torn asunder. Victory is almost a certainty. But here come Khand. They are going to arrive really just before Lindon are able to properly reinforce the dwarves. Lindon are going to have to turn some of their units around at the very least to try and meet the challenge that Khand is broaching for them here. More javelins coming in, the Legion bodyguard pushing through, still 41 of them remaining. Very strong unit indeed to have here in the late game. Connell's Shadow Guard, the Eastron Warriors routing, as are the Flag Grim. Them charging off down this pathway I'm sure won't count, such as they are. They have managed to win here, the Dwarves, and that will mean that the Dwarves are actually going to be able to come to the aid of Lindon as they now have to meet the challenge of Khand. It was a bold effort from Nevin over here to try and bring down that Dwarven defence, but it has ultimately been unsuccessful. What's going on here? There is a general afoot. The Black Serpents trying to do their thing. That is a very dangerous game to play with all these units for the reasons that I've already outlined. Just behind Dunedain Troll Slayers. There are the Grey Company as well, loitering with intent. Difficult task for them though. There's the Nurad retainers which are going to make life difficult. Pushing up the hill, there's a unit of Southron pikemen being left as a rear guard. If it's just them, you could probably just push your way through them though, even with the remnants that Arthedain have at their disposal. Forward come the evil men, and indeed the dwarves, now being joined by the elves. A beautiful sight. Reconciliation. You can see here, it's 20, 25, 40. Not many dwarves survived the initial push, but with the elves at their side now, including elven pikemen, things could be about to turn in their favour. I mean, it would be interesting to see if these nomadic marauders have got ammunition left. If they do, 1 or 2 volleys could be a real difference maker at this point. I mean, in melee they're not going to be up to much, they're really just going to be warm bodies on the front line. And little else. Of the desert, do they still have ammunition? I would assume they played a hefty part in the demise of the main body of the Dwarven army earlier on. Again, they're very depleted. They look bloodied as well. Do they have ammo? Doesn't look like it. Can't really afford to allow the Demons of the Desert to get clean shots on their front line. Otherwise this could all end in tears for the forces of good. Sons of the Fallen moving backwards. It is going to be the elven pikes marching into place. As so, Trollman of Harad. So who was that fled? It's not going to be Arthedain, so it must be Dol Amroth. They're the only ones of the blue team that have absolutely nothing left. Arthedain going to try and use their missiles to good effect here, which is understandable. It's definitely the efficient way to do things, but time might be of the essence depending on how well those demons of the desert can do. Pikemen again covering the rear from those runic units that are still trudging their way slowly over here. They have had to move forward, and yeah, the demons of the desert do still have ammunition. A devastating sight as the Sons of the Fallen move in. In come the Chieftain's Vanguard as well. The Sons of the Fallen trying to get close enough to the demons to stop them from firing, but between them and the Trollmen, this very depleted unit of Sons of the Fallen will finally be brought down by the mutants of Harad. Chieftain's Vanguard getting in and around. And they're going to charge off down that way. Not entirely sure what they are hoping to accomplish. 4 Lindon archers are over there. 18 of them. Could cycle charge them to death, I guess, easier than most other things. 193 nomadic axemen. They may not be the strongest of units, but armor piercing is going to be really useful, and just sheer numbers at this stage. They're desperately going to need the assistance of Arthedain, I think. I don't think Khazad and Lindon are going to be able to survive without it. Arthedain, though, are they actually going to have enough? I mean, there's still 40 Legion Bodyguard left and 65 Noldering Guard. That's a pretty significant thing to try and take down, and Arthedain are on the way, but Arthedain also need to bear in mind the Scion Rim, the Dragon's Breath crew, well, the Dragon's Breath crew I should say, but the actual artillery piece itself could still be a factor in this battle. Well, fighting continues. The Elves don't have that many pikes left, which means the phalanx advantage is going to shift to the red team with those Nurad halberdiers of theirs. A little further back, the Nurad retainers continuing to make a nuisance of themselves alongside the nomadic axemen, who are actually broken. Look at that, 162 men breaking in the face of some of the finest elven warriors that remain on Middle-earth. In Middle-earth, I should say. What's going on there? Trollmen of Harad still chasing the Legion Bodyguard down. What's going on over here? Chieftain's Vanguard are routing whatever's going on, so they don't really need to be pushed any further. I guess the Legion Bodyguard are just trying to move backwards to buy time for Arthedain, but there's not really much point. I mean, 39 of them, 33 Trollmen. With the rear charge as well from the 4 Lindon archers, you could deal with those Trollmen. There goes the Harad general, killed off by a pike. Trollmen are moving back in. It's all a little bit chaotic still. I still would like to call it. I would still give the slight edge perhaps to the good forces of Middle-earth, purely because of some of the quality of individual units they still have left, and I think by necessity the attack of both sides to try and get over here and assist their allies has been a little bit disjointed, but the final ones really to have any sort of continued say in this will be Mevon's runic army. Perhaps he can have the last laugh ultimately if he's able to get the Scion Rim there in time and the Dragon's Breath cannon, and he does end up routing those Arthedain pikemen. So the Easterlings will be on the way. They will follow Arthedain in. The Mithlon pikemen are leaving. Not that much time left in the battle, to be honest. Oh, I see. There is a time limit. There go the nomadic marauders. I mean, the nomadic marauders are going to pass through this canyon, but there's only 6 of them. And I would imagine that even if it's just a regular town, the basic civilians will be able to deal with them with their pitchforks when they arrive. The Legion Bodyguard trying to run, and yeah, I mean, at this point it's just a matter of running the clock down. I completely spaced on the fact that there was a time limit, which makes a lot of sense given the fact that they had to hold on to that canyon pass, very much in 300 style. If that's the case, then I'm a little bit surprised that the evil forces were not a little bit more aggressive. Given that this is the case, the Dunedain arriving on scene, joining up with what remains of the High Elves, and they will go on to meet the Dwarves at the encampment, I'm sure. And the Dragon's Breath cannon is being trundled along the road back there, but they're not going to arrive in time. The Scion River there. I mean, even if it was down to just, if it's down to just pure martial might at this point, the good team are going to win. There's too many of them left. There's too much quality. And yeah, only 3% the difference, but that 3% is made up of mostly really good units. Wardens of the North, Legion Bodyguard, Troll Slayers, Noldoran Guard, that sort of thing. Only a few units that are not of that level, like 4 Lindon Archers, and even they're very, very depleted. And Dunedain Scouts, and this is going to be it. It's a pretty chaotic fight, this, but another interesting one. I know that Morris's scenarios, on occasion, just based on observation, could maybe do with a few more draft runs, but when the final result is something which is a little bit different like this, I'm all for it. To be honest, it adds a good amount of variety to things as the Noldoran Guard push forwards. Defeat is a distinct possibility. Somehow, I don't think that's going to matter in the long run as the Elves push forward to try and get a few more kills. Just a bunch of routing units down here. Scattered remnants that ultimately will make it through the valley. Variag Bowmen. It's going to be too little too late for them now. And the final combatants will be the Easterlings and the Elves. And I think we're going to remain at 3%, because there's been quite a few units that have routed off, as is the way with the field battle. There's more areas where routing units can actually escape to, rather than running towards the enemy. Well, the Dwarven General did just die. I'm not sure. Is the Dwarven General dying part of the victory conditions? That would be the most last-minute victory from the forces of evil that I think I've ever seen there. Literally, as the guy was announcing that it was a draw, the Dwarven General got shot. I don't think it would be. I think that the conditions would probably call for more than that, because otherwise, through random chance, that fight in the canyon could have resulted in an instantaneous good team loss, which probably wouldn't have been all that satisfying. So I'll assume that's not the case, but even so, poor Balin thought he was going to live to see another day, but in the end that was not the case. You can see that just based on the kill counts as well, there was one player on each team which struggled a little bit more for kills than the others. Dol Amroth it was for the good team, and one of the runic armies for the evil team, but there was also some standout performers. I think, again, WK with Harad did really, really well, using the Muma kill in the manner that he did, the Demons of the Desert. Couldn't have done much more, really, to help out his team. And subsequently as well, I think Lindon and Khazad, kind of as I expected based on their compositions, did really, really well. And Arthedain, I think, considering the fact that they had to hold things down in the middle in probably the least attractive engagement on the field, I think they did quite well as well. To be fair, no one really played badly on this occasion. And yeah, I'm not entirely sure who I can say won this. I mean, I suppose you could say a draw is maybe accurate, considering the fact that some units, even though they were routing, did manage to get through the canyon, and they lost their general. Leonidas, his facsimile in this battle ultimately ended up falling. But subsequently, you have to say that the forces of good, technically speaking, won the battle. You know, they managed to hold the canyon, and they've also just straight up won it. If the battle had continued beyond the time limit, they would have been the one to win it in the more conventional sense. So I'd be more inclined to give the win to the good team here, in the absence of any sort of evidence that I would be able to give it to the red team. So yeah, that's that, I suppose. Big thank you to Morris for sending me this one in and for creating another interesting custom scenario. Long may it continue. And a big thank you to all of the players that were a part of this battle replay as well. Before we actually move on, I should have a look at the Khazad kill counts. Legion Bodyguard and Sons of the Fallen obviously doing really, really well. Not all of those runic units were rubbish either. There was the Carmel's Chosen, the Flagrim, and the Carmel's Shadow Guard in there. Yes, there were clansmen and warriors, but what can you do? The Ironwatch and Mirror are actually not doing all that well. They were shut down quite well by Harad in the end with the cavalry and the Muma kill. First Legion Pikes, a unit which I actually didn't see on the battlefield at all. So they must have been in melee for a relatively short amount of time. But they ended up doing the damage nonetheless. The 4th Legion Shield Guard with mixed results. Mercenary Crossbowmen did what they can. They're kind of a difficult unit to use. Warriors of Khazad. So mixed performances really from the Dwarven units, but some of them really went above and beyond, and it's mostly the ones that you would want as well, given that they were holding the canyon. Kind of a difficult push forward for the Dwarves and Dol Amroth on that side because of how well the Haradrim held them at bay and bled them out with their cavalry as they tried to advance forward. But yeah, as I was saying, what's going to be coming up next? I do have a few more battle replays, including another rather large one in Silmarillion Total War, where we'll get to see Valinor once again, so that'll probably be coming up in the next while. It may have already been done as well, because I'm going to try and record in bulk here, and then I'll piece them out as I think will be the best order to have them in. I have a 3 versus 4 temple battle as well, which that one is more likely to have already come out before this, to be honest with you, based on how I think the replays are going to fall. But if not, it will almost certainly be the one that comes straight after this. There's an Elven Civil War in Reforged. There's a free-for-all, which I do actually want to do because it's been quite a while since we've done a free-for-all, so I think it'll be good to introduce one of those again. I've got another one of Morris's scenarios, which possibly will already have been done as well, but it's a more traditional siege-based scenario, and it's very big and it's long as well. It's about 50k frames, which is why I didn't do it. Well, I haven't recorded it right at this moment, but even so, it may still come out before this one. If you follow. There's also one that I have labelled just as First Age Battle, so I assume it's a sort of a reenactment, as it were. I do also have Osgiliath 3 built, which will probably be a little bit further in the future, to be fair. That'll probably be coming out towards the end of September, but that is still something which I've also got coming up in the pipeline. So just a quick overview of some of the replays that I've got upcoming. As for anything else, there isn't really anything else. Nothing really that I wouldn't want to say in sort of a dedicated channel update video, which will probably be coming. It kind of depends. If I can get it done before I go away on my next big trip away, it'll be probably around the 12th or 13th of September. If not, then it'll be a month further in the future, because I'll probably be away for maybe away for about a month. It's not clear, but it's probably a 4-week trip away. Which means it might be either mid-September or mid-October is when the next channel update's going to come, and hopefully I'll have a little bit more of a well-rounded idea of what's going to be happening going on into the further future. But again, I'm pretty much constantly mentioning this at the end of each battle replay because it's an ongoing situation and it is developing, so things may change. It may be that I do a channel update far sooner, or it may be that I push it back until mid-October. It is what it is. The job is kind of... It's not the easiest thing to keep the channel going with this job, as I've already kind of alluded to, and it may be during the trip away that towards the tail end of it, things do revert to that 1 video a week, at least for a couple of weeks, which I'll try to avoid. But if it's only for 2 weeks, it's not the worst thing in the world, and it's just to try and keep the channel chugging along while I have these large trips away. And to be fair, it is also likely to be the single longest trip away I have while I am still in this current position at this job before I try and move on to a different post at some point next year. But it's very unlikely that I'd have another 4-week trip away anyway, so I'm just trying to prepare for it as best I can. But yeah, big thank you to Morris once again, big thank you to all the players. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.